autarky is somebody who doesn't want to cooperate and doesn't want to open up either, right? You can have opening up of an economy without cooperation, right? So that is a hegemony. And let me actually keep giving you examples as well. So let's say China was an autarky for the longest time. So they kept their economy closed, and they were not open to globalization. They were a nationalist and not open to cooperation as well, and they were building inside, right? Other examples are North Korea, still doing it, right? Venezuela, right? But not all are successful, right? India was an autarky initially, they were a closed economy, but China has done well, India has done well, right? But North Korea and Venezuela have not done well. So it's not necessary that all autarkies do well, it's just that how do you build your economy? And then let's say if you move towards a hegemony, such as let's say US or Russia, where they are globalizing, so they are open for trade with others, but in terms of what benefits them, right? So, which might mean that the US might come in and do trade with you, but you end up actually buying more from them than they buy from you. So then that's also not good, right? You could now start moving towards cooperation, and let's say we can take the example of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, where the Americans say, okay, let us have trade with North American partners like Canada, and I believe Mexico is also a part of NAFTA. So now, well, if it was only Canada, then that would be bilateralism, which means two parties, right? Um, but if you have more than two, but not a lot, such as the NAFTA, so then we call it sort of regional. So there is something between multilateralism and bilateralism, which is regional. And we have a lot of examples for this. You know, for instance, the GCC, which you have in the Gulf, in the Middle East, is regional, right? You have some very interesting examples from South America for this. You have the European Union, right, which is also regional. But then you have multilateralism, which is the best, right? So this is obviously the best, that a country should have similar policies for everybody, right? No special treatment for any country. If you're doing that, that's bilateralism. Or if you're doing it for a set of countries, that's regional. But if you're doing it like I don't know, maybe Germany or Singapore would be a very good example here, right? And well, I do know because this is from your curriculum that Singapore is a very good example. Germany is a very good example. That same policies for everybody, completely open. They are not only open to doing business with everyone, but they're also willing to cooperate with everyone. So this is basically the big high level picture for these four quadrants, right? And each quadrant obviously has its benefits and costs. So there is a trade off. And why India or China wanted to be closed economies initially, were they really able to build their industries? And then when they opened up, were they really able to actually benefit from that, right? So, in general terms, regions, countries, and industries are more reliant on cost border goods and capital flows will have higher level of cooperation, and that is what you see with Singapore or Germany, that they are exporting their goods, they're importing goods, and that's good. That's good. But then they have developed that level of efficiency as well. If India had directly started importing goods, they would not have been able to export that many goods because maybe people wouldn't have wanted their goods. They would have just wanted to sell them the goods. And the same situation would have been true for China. So, what these countries did was they said, no, we're not opening up just yet. Let us first build our local industries using our local markets. So, instead of giving their local markets to other companies, they said, no, we will use our local markets to develop our own industries. And then once we've done that, then we will open up so that our products are competitive globally. So that's kind of the trade off that is there, right? And there is a certain interdependence that comes with this. And what I was talking about for Europe, especially after the First World War and the Second World War, that they have created this interdependence on purpose so that it reduces the likelihood that they attack each other, right? Because if Germany depends on France and France depends on Germany, then they have a less chance of actually fighting, right? And you have to obviously appreciate that that interdependence could actually create an issue. So you are also open to vulnerability. So again, let's say US China, if US focuses on software and China focuses on hardware, right? Maybe that's good for both initially, and maybe they will think twice before fighting each other. But then again, if there is a fight, then the China could say, hey, no chips for you, and US will say, okay, no Android for you, right? So obviously that leaves each party vulnerable as well. So again, coming back to the quadrants, what we are going to talk about is what's good for us from an investment perspective. So this box actually it's not good, it's best. And what we want to see is movement from the bottom left towards the top right, right? And whether that is directly from the bottom left to the top right, or first towards the top or towards the right, and then towards the right or then towards the top. Either way, what we want to see is movement in the top right direction, and that's good for investment. If we see that there is something going on which is kind of working to reverse this, right, then that's bad. That's bad for us because that will be bad for profits and investment return. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a hegemony, right? And they are working to increasing cooperation. So they're strengthening their political cooperation, which means they are moving towards multilateralism. So this is good, right? This is good. It's actually moving towards the best one. But alternatively, obviously, if let's say you have something which is going towards an autarky, that they already don't have cooperation, right? And they're also closing up their economy. So that obviously is very bad, right? Where they're saying, hey, we don't want to import, we don't want to export, we just want to focus on our domestic industries, and that even will be served by companies which are owned by the government. And well, they might have maybe political reasons and more specifically national security reasons of doing that, right? But it's definitely not good from an investor's perspective. So, well, it does help them to be stronger politically, and therefore, well, countries have the right to do that. They might even want to do that if they are in that situation where they need to protect themselves, which means not having any interdependence on outside companies, right? So all the technology they need, all the goods, services, especially sensitive industries like media and even banking, they will want to control themselves. Right. So examples, China closed the economy. I think India is also a good example in the early years, closed the economy, and until the Manmohan Singh came along, India was relatively closed, right? But they used that time very well. They used that time very well because they developed their infrastructure, they develop their local industries using their local markets. And then finally, when China and India are opening up, and China more than India is obviously very competitive now, and we've seen that benefit in the reduction of their poverty. I mean, if you look at their GDP per capita, that has increased significantly over the past few decades. But not all countries are able to do this. So North Korea and Venezuela have not been able to actually do that. So autarky is not always a good option. It's just that how are you able to use it? And then eventually the benefits only come when you open up, right? So when you open up, do you see the benefits? If you have built properly. Now, US, Russia obviously have opened up, and they have seen benefits. Well, Russia has obviously gone through a lot of issues now, but US is definitely having a certain influence over the rest of the world. But do they compromise on their interests to share those benefits? If not, then they are not at the stage of multilateralism in terms of cooperation. They are globalizing, but they're still not cooperating. That is what makes them a hegemony. So what happens is that a hegemonic system can benefit both the hegemonic countries themselves and the international system. But if the people that are following their rules do that, right? So they will also reap the benefits. And if somebody is not willing to do that, then obviously it's not going to work out. And that's the issue we are seeing in the US and China, that instead of going to that level of cooperation, they are both inclined towards their own specific interests. And that is why you have these costs, right? Because one might become more competitive than the other, which will then increase your geopolitical risk. And that is what we see with the US and China now, that with so many of Chinese exports now coming to the US and then some US people losing their jobs, right? So it has created a geopolitical risk. And the same goes for China, that so much of their software, so like for example, Android, right, is coming from the US, and then now China is probably thinking of developing their own. So countries like US and Russia are hegemonic countries. Then you have your best option. They are willing to cooperate and opened up their economies. Their private firms are fully integrated into the global supply chain with multiple trade partners. Fantastic examples like Germany and Singapore here. And there are multiple enabling factors. It doesn't happen overnight, right? Number one, you must need it, right? Singapore, Germany, Switzerland we saw is landlocked. So Singapore obviously has limited natural resources. Germany went through a lot of difficult time. So you must need to open up, right? But then you must have factors that enable you to enjoy the benefits of opening up, right? So for example, in the case of Singapore, their location is very, very good in terms of trade, right? The cultural factors are enabling as well, because the population is very diverse, fluent in English, highly skilled. And what about their institutions, which provide a stable, enabling environment with the best talent going into the government to provide a very, very good infrastructure of regulation. So that's obviously the best. Now, many countries are actually between bilateralism and multilateralism, and of course, many are regional as well. Now, what does this mean, right? What does this mean? It basically means that, and we've discussed this before as well, that if you have some special treatment between two countries, then that's not really multilateralism. Or if you're doing it within the region, and very good example is GCC, or let's say the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is the US and Canada and Mexico. So you're having sort of a special treatment for some countries, but you're not having that treatment for everybody. So that is between bilateralism and multilateralism. right? Reality is somewhere in the middle. So countries typically exist on a spectrum between these two, right? There'll be regionalism in the middle. And you have the European Union as a very good example of that, right? Japan once was bilateral, and I would say US is and Japan is still, US I think more is still going to prefer bilateral treaties than a multilateral one, because see, what happens in bilateral is that you can actually have a case to case customized cooperation with each country separately instead of having one policy for everyone. Now, obviously, that's unfair, but it might actually make sense in some cases as well. Right. So that is your four quadrants. Now, what we will study next is how countries try and move between these quadrants, right? And what we are most concerned about is countries moving towards the bottom or the left. How we can detect this happening and try and predict that this is happening is by looking at what they are doing with these tools. So in the next video, we're going to learn about these three tools and try and figure out countries' planned moves if they are planning to move towards the bottom or the left, because that's not good for our investments, right? So we need to obviously be managing that risk, and how we do that is by monitoring the use of these tools, which is something that we are going to study and look at in the next video.